We have this incredible scientific story of our universe. It's phenomenal. We could call it miraculous. A strange ball of matter explodes, and somehow from that explosion we have all of the materials, all of the building blocks that we need for everything that ever has been or ever will be part of this universe. It's a remarkable story of astounding beauty, of profound creativity. It's a story of unity. It's a story of diversity. It's a story of life, of joy. It's a story of love evolving into the world. But it's also a story of chaos, surprises, and destabilization, and also profound destruction and devastation and violence. In the book, The Universe Story, Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry suggest that this chaos and disruption have characterized every era of the universe. They also claim that violence and destruction are present at every level of our existence: elemental, geological, organic, and human. In their book, they tell that story of the universe from the Big Bang unfolding through all of the billion years until today. And what's really interesting in this scientific story is the similarities, the parallels that it has with the Hindu cosmology that Roberta referred to earlier when she did her story for all ages. The Trimurti, the three forms that God manifests with, as Brahma, the creator, who brings it into being, and then Vishnu, the preserver, who is actually active for billions of years, sustaining, as those things that have been created together work themselves into a finely wrought balance, create a cohesive system. And then Shiva, the destroyer, who is also sometimes referred to as the transformer. But in Hinduism, Shiva is not a scary, bad, demon kind of god who only makes things explode with dynamite. Actually, the root word for Shiva in Sanskrit means auspicious. And the name Shiva means pure. Shiva is understood to be both a destroyer and a benefactor, and is actually one of the most popular household gods in India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. In the Hindu cosmology, we learn of a universe that is cyclically created and destroyed every 8.64 billion years. The time is divided into 4 epochs, and we're in the last of those 4 epochs. Time will end in this worldview 432,000 years from now, 432,000 years from now. Now, in the scientific story, we may not talk about cycles that are exactly 8.64 billion years long, and we don't really know if there have been previous epochs and if there will be future epochs. But this cycle that's described in Hinduism of creation, preservation, and destruction is absolutely a pattern that we see repeated over and over and over again. Brian Swimme and Thomas Berry tell us that even a supernova is part of this pattern. Over millions of years, clouds of hydrogen and helium atoms are drawn together in stars by their mutual attractions, and without going into all of the scientific details, their collisions create higher temperatures, atoms are destroyed, and that results in implosions, there's nuclear burning, and of course this is happening in that sustaining period over millions of years. These stars are holding steady with all of these implosions happening, but then ultimately enough pressure is generated and the helium runs out and the star collapses into a black hole. But not everything is pulled into that nothingness. Some elementary particles escape. Swimme and Berry write, freed from the gravitational death of the star, these elements journey into the night sky, eventually to be drawn together with other elements. Under their own attraction, they form an entirely new system. A new star forms, new planets form, new life forms, and perhaps new consciousness forms. Certainly a new area of the story of the universe begins out of the supernova explosion that destroys the old stellar world. Scientists currently believe that some 20 supernovas of this sort contributed to the elements that make up our solar system. Destruction, Shiva at play, leading to the new creation of a new solar system. There are other examples. In the very beginning of life on Earth, there were prokaryotic organisms that were very happily enjoying Earth's hydrogen-rich atmosphere. They were in that sustaining, preserving mode. But then the hydrogen began to run out of the atmosphere, and so some of the organisms mutated. Blue-green bacteria emerged that could go into the water and draw on the hydrogen in the water. That released oxygen. And over the years, the levels of oxygen grew in the atmosphere, and unfortunately for those original organisms, the oxygen was actually toxic for them. It's called the oxygen catastrophe, or the Great Oxygenation Event. There was mass extinction. That could have been the end of life on Earth, but instead life mutated. And a cell emerged that could use the oxygen as a source of energy. Then Vishnu comes in. Millions of years of oxygen-breathing life forms developing and sustaining a system of balance. We see these catastrophic events again in the Paleozoic era, with the Permian-Triassic extinction, the Great Dying, some 245 million years ago. Between 75% and 95% of Earth's species went extinct during that time. And then 67 million years ago, with the extinction of the dinosaurs. Each time replaced with new biodiversity, moving into the Cenozoic era, a time of profound creativity. That was actually only 2% of our history, but was 12 million years long, when most of the orders of mammals came into being. The ministerial theme for this month is balance. Thinking about that stability that exists in the sustaining part of that cycle. But what both the scientific and Hindu cosmology suggest is that balance, that stability, only exists in that larger context of these cycles of destruction and creation. That's true for universes, it's true for galaxies and planets, as I've been describing. It's also true in our own lives. Shiva is often pictured holding a trident, which represents the unity of three worlds that humans face: the inner world, the immediate world, and the larger, broader overall world. This is symbolic of the fact that we can expect these cycles of creativity, preservation, and destruction in all of those levels of our lives. We all have times when there is a destabilizing destruction, a devastating event, the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, the loss of a job, a change in our health, a blizzard, a tornado, a hurricane, or a flood that devastates a community. Times when Shiva comes into our lives. And then we see new creativity emerge as we redefine ourselves, learn new skills, find beauty in the ashes. Some of you may remember the town of Greensburg, Kansas, a town of some 300 people, a small rural town that was demolished by a tornado in May of 2007. 95% of the buildings and homes were completely erased. The other 5% were severely damaged. Half of the population relocated. The rest of the town lived in emergency shelters. And over the course of that summer, they would have weekly tent meetings to talk about how they were surviving and get the news, because the communication systems had been completely broken down, and figure out how they were going to rebuild, what they were going to do next, whether they would rebuild. Ultimately, they did. And they turned Greensburg into the greenest town in the country. 100% renewable energy. utilizing the same winds that had come through as a tornado to destroy a town with wind turbines to provide the power for their new homes and buildings. Chaos theory is another scientific model which offers some interesting ways of understanding the story of our universe. Now, chaos in this sense isn't necessarily talking about destruction or disorder. It's really the science of surprises, of that which is nonlinear and unpredictable, which we can't control. It exists in contrast to the scientific notion of determinism, the idea that if we know the laws of nature, we will be able to see that the universe always unfolds in predictable ways based on these laws, and we'll be able to predict what will happen. Chaos theory says that actually we never have enough information, we never understand the full complexity of a system well enough to be able to accurately make those predictions. Chaos theory brings us the butterfly effect, the idea that changes on the small scale can affect the large scale. A butterfly can flap its wings here, and 2,000 miles away, it might ultimately affect the weather patterns, not just today, but in the weeks or months or years to come. And of course, there's no way that we can predict or control how the millions of butterflies in our world are going to move their wings. John Mendelsohn and Elena Blumenthal, in their paper Chaos Theory and Fractals, suggest that chaos might actually be a necessary part of order in a paradoxical way. They write, one of the most interesting issues in the study of chaotic systems is whether or not the presence of chaos may actually produce ordered structures and patterns on a larger scale. It has been found that the presence of chaos may actually be necessary for larger scale physical patterns such as mountains and galaxies to arise. In other words, unpredictability, surprise, and randomness might be required for new creations and for stability. So what are the implications of these worldviews? They offer, to some extent, part of an answer to that age-old question, why do bad things happen? Why did that happen to me? And they give a clear answer that it's not because we're being punished and we haven't been singled out or targeted. It's because randomness is built in. Unpredictability, destruction, transformation are just part of how the universe works. Knowing that, of course, doesn't change the fact that we will experience devastation and loss. In Greensburg, people died in that tornado. Pets were lost. Homes were destroyed. Yet in this worldview, we see that after a devastation, there is hope for a new life and a new stability that will emerge. This worldview also lets us know the importance of flexibility. In these moments of catastrophe, rigidity isn't what survives. Evolution favors diversity, creativity, and experimentation. Trying new things, reinventing ourselves, improvising, adapting, and overcoming. Like those early life forms, developing the ability to breathe oxygen. This also has implications for aging, learning to adapt with each new change that comes into our lives, each new loss that comes our way. This worldview tells us that this takes millions of years. Be patient with yourself. At the same time that newness and novelty are rewarded, authors Heifetz, Grashow, and Linsky, in their book, The Practice of Adaptive Leadership, point out that successful adaptive changes don't just throw everything away. They build on the past. They point out the fact that as humans, we have only a 2% DNA difference with chimpanzees. 98% that stayed the same. Successful adaptations are both conservative and progressive, they tell us. We draw on the wisdom and the experience of the past and build on the best of what already exists. This worldview also tells us of the importance of being part of a mutually supportive community. In the universe story, Swim and Barry point out the emergence of symbiotic relationships in the Mesozoic era, which led to what they refer to as the survival of the most cooperative. In Greensburg, the transformation of their town was only possible because of the assistance of what the current mayor refers to as 2.8 million friends and neighbors. Chaos theory reminds us that we are not in control of the outcome. We can set all sorts of things in motion. We can make great plans, well-informed plans, good plans. But ultimately, we can't control the result. Heifetz, Brashow, and Linsky point out this means that we have a task of making a plan with the freedom built in to deviate based on what we learn as we experiment. They suggest that we commit to a strategy wholeheartedly, but leave room for the possibility that we are completely wrong. Ultimately, they remind us that in times of change and creativity, it's important to stay connected to our fundamental purpose. To ask ourselves, what new way of thinking and acting am I willing to engage on behalf of what I believe most deeply? Finally, just as this worldview teaches us that we are not in control, it also reveals a world in which the presence of a mountain shapes its ecosystem, and a butterfly can flap its wings and change the world. In this perspective, along with all living beings and even inanimate objects, we are co-creators of the universe. The world we inherited was the result of innumerable interactions and choices. The world of the future will be based on what we collectively do right now. May our creativity, may our times of stability and our times of transformation be based on love. May it ever be so.